So with it being Halloween, I decided to talk about some Halloween content, and since I'm not a horror fan, what better than some Scooby Doo movies? Specifically, I want to talk about the 4 straight-to-VHS films from 1998 to 2001, which have a unique style and for the most part a unique cast. The unique style mostly comes from the art style, which was used for these 4 films, but also the change to the mystery element, with these 4 films focusing on real ghosts and ghouls, instead of people in masks. While the franchise had tried this before a few times, this is the series of films that people remember for it. So let's talk briefly about each film in turn, and then look at the overall elements and how they play out together. So this series of films began with Scooby Doo on Zombie Island, which was originally meant to be a cinema release, but instead was released on VHS. This was due to a growing home media audience, alongside the success of the animated Batman films, ironically a film series which began with a VHS release going to cinemas. So for the plot, the film has a unique setup, by having the gang having split up after years of solving mysteries together, with them going their separate ways. Velma owns a bookstore that focuses on mysteries, Daphne and Fred have a show called Coast to Coast where they tour the country, while Shaggy and Scooby have gone through a few jobs, with them being fired from their job of airport security when we meet them. This leads to a story where the gang come back together for Daphne's new show, where they are hunting for real ghosts. This sets the plot in motion with a great series of chase sequences set to a great song. Once this ends, we get to the main setting with the introduction of one of the guest cast, this being Lena, who leads the group to Zombie Island. From there we are introduced to other cast members. These are Simone, the landowner, Bo, the gardener and undercover agent, Jock, the boat owner, and Snakebite, a fisherman who doesn't like people. These lot are our suspects with an early focus on Bo. Now the mysteries in Scooby Doo have never been the strongest aspect of it, and this is still true of the film, with a focus on character. They do still give the mystery importance, but the setup of the story doesn't put it in the forefront. But there is still a mystery, but it changes from who are the villains to what happened here. With actual ghosts and zombies in the story, it means that there aren't people in masks using explainable tricks. Instead we have the supernatural. The change of the format gives this film a very unique feel and tone. This is also reflected in the format as the gang try to solve the mystery, but slowly things become unexplainable and they can't do anything. The film's big twist is that the villains aren't the ghosts and zombies, instead it's the cat people. So I should have probably noted their existence before saying they are the villains. So the cat people are in fact Simone, Lena and Jock. The former 2 being settlers of the island who were attacked by pirates and so took revenge with the power of their cat god. This made them into cat creatures who need humans to survive, which led to all the ghosts and zombies. This is what has kept them alive for centuries, with Jock being a somewhat recent addition to help with transport to the island. While a lot of this history is left to an exposition dump towards the end, the general build-up to it is strong. Their defeat is somewhat underwhelming, with them being destroyed due to them missing the time when they needed to feed. Bo was a red herring, while Snakebite wasn't involved at all. From the get-go, this film has a completely different style from the show and the few films that preceded it. The film's level of animation is an obvious thing, but what it does with the characters more so. Scooby and Shaggy are basically unchanged from the past, but are a bit more rounded. Fred is as static as he's always been. He has lost the ascot, but that's all the development he's gone through. Velma likewise hasn't changed much, with her getting straight back into the life of the investigator. The notable one of the gang is definitely Daphne, who is the most changed with her new show obviously, but it's her who gets the plot going due to her new way of life as a celebrity, and her old way of life combining. So with the success of the first, a second was put into production, which would have a smaller budget but continue with mostly the same cast and a mostly similar style. This one takes the cast to a town hosting a festival, which allows for a much grander scale to the story and a larger cast of suspects. Unlike with the previous film, the mystery element of the story is far more important, with there being a lot more clues and even a trap which was missing from the last one. Due to the larger cast, it means that most of them aren't well defined, but the notable new characters are Ben, who is a writer, and the Hex Girls, who are a pop group with a horror twist, consisting of Fawn, Dusk and Luna. There are plenty of other characters such as the Mayor and Jack, a restaurant owner, but they aren't as well defined, with them being members of the town rather than characters in their own right. The decision to characterise the town works well for the mystery of this film, as the twist of the story is that the entire town was behind the ghostly goings on, with them doing it as a publicity stunt for the festival. All the initial supernatural elements of the story with the creation of the town is to get more people interested. It's a cool twist and opposes that of the previous film, where the twist was the ghosts were real, while now it's everyone was behind it, which is a twist in itself. But that isn't the end of the ghostly goings on, as the film also still plays the ghost is real card, as it's revealed that Ben's ancestor was a real witch, as the town had believed, and he wants to use her power, which leads to her ghost actually appearing. The final conflict is an actual battle unlike Zombie Island, with a lot more action, and unlike Zombie Island where the villains were defeated because they ran out of time, this time the heroes actually defeat them by trapping the witch and Ben in the book. Ben is a cool twist villain, although as he's played by Tim Curry, maybe that stretches the term twist villain. He works well with Velma, who of course knows all about him due to her interest in mysteries, and builds on her place in the previous film as the owner of a bookstore that specialised in mysteries. His entire character is built around his desire to find his ancestor's book. His ancestor's name is Sarah Ravencroft. I never mentioned it and only called her the witch. Anyway, back to the matter at hand. As he knows it's a spellbook which will give him power, but pretends it's just a book she used for medical purposes, saying she was a Wiccan and not a witch, as the townspeople believed her to be before killing her. I think the twist around him and his ancestor are well executed, and gives a final twist to the story, which adds a bit more excitement in the final stretch. The gang aren't really changed from their previous film, and are very static, except for Velma. This story gives her more to do with a stronger focus on her. Due to the mystery being an actual mystery with people to unmask, she's in her element. That alongside the scene she gets with Ben gives her more prominence than the previous film. Not to mention the part she plays in defeating the witch, with her being the one to put the pieces together and set in motion her defeat. The choice to create the Hex Girls as a pop group gives this film a few extra bits of music that pair well with the soundtrack, and unlike the other songs are diegetic, although aren't played over any action and instead are there for the group's introduction and the end of the film. Out of all the things that were introduced in these films, the Hex Girls were the only thing to carry over to the rest of the franchise. Alien Invaders is a bit of a change from the previous two films, we'll be using the same format as Witch's Ghost but with a smaller cast. By that I mean we have fake monsters and real ones, taking the form of confirming the existence of extraterrestrial life in the Scooby Doo universe. But skipping over that, the film focuses far more on Scooby and Shaggy than the other films, with the two of them being at maybe their best ever. The film has the duo fall in love with characters Crystal and her dog Amber. This gives the film a fun vibe as the two of them are mostly separate from the mystery element, but end up investigating with their love interests instead. This gives us some great moments of comedy as the two try to impress them, with Crystal finding Shaggy somewhat peculiar, but in a way she finds appealing. Amber on the other hand mostly pushes away at Scoob until later on. The peak of this is the musical numbers Shaggy sings, in which he imagines a life for them. Ultimately things don't work out as they would have liked when it turns out Crystal and Amber are aliens. The rest of the gang are a bit underserved by the story, with them entirely focused on the mystery. This does mean that they are a bit in the background to the more interesting story, but still get to have some good moments, notably their general reactions to Scooby and Shaggy's actions, or lack of eating. The mystery itself is a weak one, as it's clear who's behind it, with there being a lot of red herrings that don't work. The villains are a trio called Max, Steve and Laura, who run the radio telescopes and upon finding gold decide to mine it out while scaring people off with the alien disguises. It does give us some fun scenes, especially when Scooby and Shaggy are abducted, but it's really playing second fiddle to the romance. While there are 4 other supporting characters, the only ones to be potential suspects are Sergio, who owns a diner, and Buck, who is a car repairman. The only thing pointing to them is Sergio being randomly suspicious of the gang for no explained reason, which they also don't know about, and Buck being scary, and on the side of the road at an odd time. There is also Lester and Dottie, while Dottie is just there for some back and forth, while Lester is an elderly man who is short of a tin hat. By that I mean he's a believer in aliens with no actual proof and tells stories of his abduction, which potentially could have even happened. This makes him a fun character and the most convincing suspect. The real problem with the mystery does come from the aliens being a trio, and there's no clues from any characters other than those at the radio telescope to know each other, meaning that there isn't another trio that could be behind it. The film has a far lighter tone than the previous two, going more for comedy. This shift of tone does give this film a very different feeling, which helps it stand out, although we do somewhat lose the supernatural element in the process, due to it being aliens. But with the aliens, the film does still have the twist that the creatures were real all along. This is also one of the very few times they address the outdated looks of the characters, which have not been updated since the 60s. It's a very fun moment of character that. The final film of this quadrilogy was Cyberchase, which scales things down, but at the same time ups the scale. The supporting cast is cut down to only 4 suspects in a single location, but as the film features the setting of a virtual world, it means that scale is up somewhat. So the plot of this film is a gang are going to see a video game based on them, made by their friend Eric. Compared to the previous films where they're going to entirely new places and meeting new people, this one has them in an environment where they're at least somewhat familiar with things. And I will admit that the first scene with the gang does make me think more of an episode of the television series, rather than the start of a film. Now the mystery of this story is really bad, as there is a real lack of clues, with there really only being one, that being that the Phantom Virus likes baseball. Due to this one piece of evidence, it points directly to Bill, with him doing it due to being annoyed that Eric beat him in a competition. There aren't really even any red herrings, as the only other 2 suspects, neither of them have real motivations, and one of them has no background in programming and so couldn't have done it. It's the most underwhelming cast in these movies because of this, not helped by the majority of it taking place in a virtual world, which lacks them, leaving them to make observations from the real world. So let's talk about the virtual reality and the virus, as the concept is actually really interesting. So the virus somehow is able to exist in the real world, and so the opening scene has it leave the computer and appear in the real world, which has very interesting implications. And once the gang arrive, they chase it down with magnets, but this chase is just to set up the group being trapped in the game and having to play through it. A game so unbalanced that even the designer never beat it. Someone really needs to hire some game testers. The majority of this is just the group running around some environments and finding Scooby snacks, which gives us some fun short scenes of both action and comedy, but the best is the final mission, as there is more going on here than just the chase. During this mission, the gang meet their virtual counterparts, all with their older designs, or in the case of Scooby and Shaggy, slightly different colour schemes, which I think appeared in the 80s or 70s for a brief time. This is a cool idea of having them essentially meet their past, the people they were prior to these films. Some of the fun which comes from this is just seeing how their characterisation has changed and stayed the same. The Daphnes are definitely the most different, as she has definitely gone through the most development for these films. I'm not quite sure about what the writers were trying to say with this meeting, as there is clearly some reason behind it, and I can only see it as a brief bit of commentary about their lifestyle and how they live an episodic life where nothing changes, and they just do the same thing day after day. Something which hasn't gone away with the TV shows, with a few exceptions. So we've essentially got these more well-rounded characters who have changed, meeting their older counterparts who are living the same life, but they're aware of the repeating nature of it. There's maybe something more here, but I haven't realised what it is yet. But despite that, it's just fun to have the characters able to bounce off of themselves. There are also a few returning villains, with some iconic villains from Scooby Doo Where Are You and the Scooby Doo show. This makes sense with the context of the game itself, and having them as these easily defeated fodder does go to show how effective the gang have become over the years. And for a random and unimportant fact, but I'd only ever seen Iron Face when I first saw this film, and to this day I still haven't seen the episodes for the others. Go me. But that's really all there is to say about Cyberchase. I mean, I could complain about the magnet becoming virtual and yet affects the virtual characters but not the world itself, and why it doesn't work in the pockets of the characters, but I don't want to nitpick here. Now let's talk about more overall things, and I'll begin with the cast, since as I mentioned at the start, these films have a unique cast. Frank Welker is the only returning actor, reprising his role of Fred, but all the others are new. Casey Kasem was asked to return, but the studio didn't want to make Shaggy vegan, and so for Zombie Island, Billy West took up the role. He was replaced by Scott Innes for the rest of the films due to West's commitments to Futurama. Scott Innes voiced Scooby Doo for all of the films, and Shaggy for the majority of them as just mentioned. Daphne was voiced by Mary Kay Bergman for the first three, but due to her sad passing, Grey DeLisle was recast for Cyberchase, making this her first time voicing the character who she'd go on to be the main voice of. Finally Velma, who was voiced by BJ Ward. This cast was also provided the voices for the characters for a few video games, and so despite not seeing these films until later, I was very used to this cast, and I will admit this is one of my favourites. I think they all do a great job of capturing the character of their characters, especially Bergman's Daphne, who is very unique. And it is tragic she didn't get the chance to provide the voice for all of the films. Now we have the music. So other than the instrumental soundtrack, each film has 3 songs. The first is a version of the show's theme that is unique and is designed for the plot and tone of each film. Then the other 2 are chase songs, which are used for the initial chase sequence and then later a bit before the end. The only exceptions to this are Witch's Ghost, which has the 2 Hex Girls songs instead, and Alien Invaders, with one of the songs being replaced by Shaggy's Daydream. The quality ranges from amazing to what was alright, I guess. I think Cyberchase has the weakest, with its theme song coming in very late at around the 17-minute mark, which given that these movies are only about 70 minutes long each, is really late. I'm not too keen on the Alien Invaders theme, but Cyberchase is the worst sounding to me. Now for the animation and the art style, as these films are very unique in style. They have a bit of a realistic style to them, which was a holdover from Zombie Island and its high budget, and while the rest of the films don't have that same budget, they are still really high in quality, while being visually impressive. The animation does change from hand-drawn to digital for Cyberchase, and while I have complained a lot about Cyberchase already, this is just another thing I have against it. It's not that it's necessarily bad, it's just that it doesn't match the style of the previous 3 films, with being far too bright against the darker colours of the others, and just being a bit too clean, which is something fans of animation do bring up all the time when something goes from hand-drawn to digital. Ironically, I think this style works for the video game sections, but it is out of place for the real-world parts, and I would have actually liked to have seen the 2 styles mixed for this film, but that presumably wasn't possible. So now for the overall character stuff. From the first film onwards, there are some arcs for the characters in singular films, which don't really affect the next. Mostly because the new status quo introduced in Zombie Island is present for all of them, and the notable events that occur for Scooby and Shaggy and Alien Invaders don't play into Cyberchase. The films as a series, while not directly connected, do share a lot of elements, and so feel like their own continuity, where monsters are real, which gives this stretch a darker edge until the last one goes a bit off that idea, with a focus on sci-fi instead of horror. I would rank them, but that's not necessary, due to I think they do get slowly worse as they go on. That doesn't mean I think they're at all bad, except Cyberchase, but the darker tone slowly goes away, and that is what hooked me with Zombie Island. So it ends up being like a 10 out of 10, and then a 9 and an 8 for the first 3 sort of thing. While I would definitely like to think of the first 3 as a trilogy, I think the characters essentially facing their past in the final one does make it a full circle thing. And if there had been another film, I think that would have been lost from Cyberchase. So it's an overall strong quadrilogy. So as someone who isn't a fan of horror, Scooby Doo has always been my way into that world, and these ones especially are the ones that hold up the best for me, and I go back to every year. I wouldn't call them perfect at all, but they're unique, and straight from the format of the franchise for the better. Even so, Zombie Island is the best Scooby Doo movie, and nobody can tell you otherwise.